Well, very happy to be here. Happy that I'm not the first and only one that talks in English. That's first. Happy to represent the Ministry of Water Management and especially the water envoy of the Kingdom of Netherlands. And especially also happy because I already viewed the exhibition yesterday and had some conversation to experience that ideas about living with water are popping up everywhere and are a bit the same. And also between Slovenia and the Netherlands. So I think that is a bond. My name is Hans Brouwer. I'm an ecologist, and as you, I contain about 80% of water, I think. So living with water, I would say there is no living without water. But not many people are aware by day basis that water is so important. For me, it started in my study as a student, as an ecologist, busy with protecting wetlands, and later with the ministry involved in land reclamation projects, in designing teams, and also in flood relief programs until now. So a history of water. And I will lead you through water management during the centuries in Holland. And then I think it's important to realize the location of Holland. Water is very important and one of the most important topics in this country, especially because of the location. As you can see, we are a delta area. We have 4 major European rivers leading through our country to the sea. So we deal with the sea and with the threat of storm surges and sea level rise, but it also discharges of river water. And you know, a saying is like God created the world and the Dutch created the Netherlands, and this is a picture that might show that a bit from Roman times, from the Middle Ages and the present day, that the country very much changed also because of technology that made it possible to have land reclamation and drainage. And the next picture that shows a bit that history. It's a bit difficult picture, but it shows in time the technological development on the top and what happens to the land. You see that we started with digging ditches, with building flood mounds, with building dikes, and at the end with technology being able with steam mills to reclaim large parts of land. And I don't know if you visited the Netherlands one time by airplane and you land at Schiphol Airport, that used to be a lake, and it's located below sea level. And you don't realize, but that is really the fact. And the graphic shows that by drainage and by all these new techniques, you see an effect on environment by subsiding of land. A large part of the Dutch country is of peat, which is from mosses and which contains from nature a lot of water. And making this land accessible for agriculture meant drainage, but by draining, it dries out, and even more, you get a chemical reaction which produces CO2, and which leads to a chemical burning of the soil, and it leads to subsidence of land. And at the same time, we see the sea level rising. So that gives a picture about the problem we have. We have a lot of technology, but at the same time, our land is sinking, a large part, and the sea level is rising. And we also expect more water through the rivers. And I think this is a striking graphic that shows that if we would not protect the country with dikes and dams and dunes, that more than 50% would be flooded on a regular basis, and that's the area where the most people live, but also the most economical produce is. So that explains why this country is investing for centuries a lot in flood protection. And this shows the center part of Holland, the river area, and it gives an idea about all the dike breaches that has been for a few hundred years and shows, in fact, the vulnerability of the country. And then our last big disaster. 1 February 1953, a storm surge at the North Sea, which led to floodings in Holland, Belgium, France, and England. This area flooded also because it was after wartime and all the maintenance, what should have been done, there was no time and money for that. So the land was flooded. 1,800 casualties, people drowned. People were waiting for days on their roofs to get rescued in a time that the government in The Hague didn't realize at the first moment, because there were no helicopters, there was little communication, and a really other era. But that led to a reaction that we would not let it happen again. A few pictures from that time, from the storm surge and the disaster, and it didn't happen afterwards again. What happened, and you see the little graphic down below, that is that the government decided over a 40 years period to control our coast by building storm surge dams, by building big dams, by heightening and strengthening dikes, with the effort that 1953 would not ever happen again. And the picture of this storm surge is in fact a special one, because in that time, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, there was not much attention on environment yet. The environment movement just started to get organized. And this is a token of another way of thinking of environment and flood protection, because this dam, it should have been, the idea was to make a closed dam. And after a lot of protest, this dam, the Eastern Scheldt storm surge barrier, was designed with open doors, so the tide could come in to the sea arms and nature values could be maintained. So in a way, a start of another way of thinking how to deal with nature and water. Another one, another big storm surge barrier, the Maasland barrier, built because, you know, in a traditional way we would have heightened and strengthened dikes, but then the consequence would have been that a lot of landscape and nice old towns would have been damaged very much. So the idea is, can we not make, with new technology, doors where we can close the new waterway. This is the shipping route from Rotterdam to the rest of Europe. And in fact, to give you an impression, these arms of these two doors are as high as the Eiffel Tower in Paris, and it's followed in many places in the world, this kind of constructions. It's an idea of a new way of thinking how to deal with these kind of threats. And then in the 90s, early 90s, the Delta works were finished. And we were so arrogant to think, Holland is finished. We are protected from flooding. It will never happen again. And then we were surprised in 1993 and 1995, because in our idea, the threat came from the sea. Our experience were storm surges. We put locks on the front door, but we forget the back door, which is the rivers. It's not so much water maybe and not so devastating, but anyway. So in 1993 and 1995, we experienced near floods because of high river discharges. And if you look at the picture, you say near floods, and it looks like real floods, but near floods because the dikes didn't break. But what happened, and what was a wake-up call for Dutch people, for media, for politicians, is that in 1995, the commissioner of the Queen of the center part of Holland decided to evacuate the area. So in a short period, 250,000 people were summoned to leave the area. And that led to another program for flood protection, Room for the River. And Room for the River is shows also another way of thinking. We were, for centuries, by building dikes and heightening and strengthening dikes, we were fighting against water. We wanted to keep the water out. In the 90s, we had some experience with nature restorations in the river. An idea started from the United States that it would be possible if you give nature space and time, it will develop. And we experience in the river by doing so that all kinds of species that were extinct came back. But we also discovered that nature has in itself a function and a role in flood protection. So the idea and the experience of the ecological environment transferred to the civil engineers, who said two things. I just mentioned the weak peat area in the western part of the country where the land is subsiding. The civil engineers said also, is it possible to always, every time, heighten and strengthen dikes on weak soils? Every time we make it higher, it gets more weight and it sinks in. So maybe it's not such a wise strategy. That was the first idea. Maybe we should look different at the rivers. The other idea is that we said, you know, of course you can defend yourself with dikes. But what you in fact do is making it possible that the level of water in the river is rising, is going up, while at the other side of the dike, the land is subsiding. So if it goes wrong, the damage will be ever increasing. Maybe it's wiser to give space for water. So to receive more water, in a way, it doesn't lead to a higher level in the river. And that means that you have to spread it over a larger surface. And that fits very well the Dutch situation, because I started to tell you that we are a delta. And in a delta, rivers from nature meander. They change their ways all the time. And through the centuries, we made that less and less possible. And now we said, let's find space to give that a little bit back. Well, these are, in fact, the techniques, you could say, where at some points where we in the past would have heightened and strengthened dikes, now we said, is it not possible to remove and put them maybe backwards, so we have bigger floodplains, depoldering, lowering of floodplains, making side channels. Now you see that on this picture, and I will show you later two examples. It's a program of 34 projects all over the river, which ends this year. We started in 2000. It ends this year, and 2017 refers to that water safety has been established, but it doesn't mean that all the projects are finalized as a whole. And important is, I think, to realize that all these projects interconnect. What a project does is attract water, make it upstreams that the water level go down, but at a certain point it doesn't work anymore and you need another project. So it's a chain of projects where, as you can say, if one pearl falls out, then you don't have a chain anymore. So you need all these projects interconnecting. And to give some examples, and I was very happy that we had a little bit also about the economic effects. Room for the River was decided upon in economic, very positive time. So the local and regional governors said to the central government, you know, we agree that you try to find room for the river for flood protection, but if you do so, please take the opportunity to improve the spatial quality of the river. A lot of things in the past went wrong. The cities that tended to develop with their back to the river, pollution, building in floodplains, maybe try to make it better. And this is one of the examples, the River Park Nijmegen, and this is before Room for the River came. A bend in the river, leading, and also a history where the town get closer to the river, and one of the few opportunities in an urban area to make space for water. And what we in fact did, and I show you on the next, this is the design, is making a side channel. There was a lot of opposition to start with. 50 people, 50 houses were there and had to be demolished, so people opposed very much. But the idea was that if you design it well, then it can be part of town, and the ambition of Nijmegen also to develop on the other side of the river would be made possible. So after some years in discussion, people started to see the quality of the idea. The municipality really wanted this development, and I'm happy to say, because this project finalized some years ago, that when I go to the area and talk to people that live there, they look back and they say, you know, it was really a problem, and we had a big discussion, and we were against, and we had a difficult time for 10 years, but the area has improved. And this is how it looks like now. And when there is high water, there is the water can get in. There's water a whole year round, but it doesn't flow normally, and it flows only with high levels of water because you want the river to be maintained as a channel for shipping. And we built some new bridges and a new quay. And what you see now happening in Nijmegen, that really people cross over the river now. And there is a lot of activity on the new side, on the side channel side, with theater, with leisure. And happy to say that the municipality says now, of Nijmegen, they refer to this project. They said we were with our back to the river, but now the river is the new center of town. And here are a few pictures of the archaeology, of the new features in the area, which I think is of quite high quality, and that we were very happy to be able to really build good quality elements that will last long. And this is an example in an urban area. And this is another one, the Polder Noordwaard, near the Biesbos in the western part of the country. A big area which had been flooded in the 15th century, and what is left is the Biesbos area, which is a freshwater intertidal area, never reclaimed again. This polder has been reclaimed, and now we decided to give it back to the river to be able, in times, to have a shortcut to sea. And this is the design of that project. And you see what we did, and it was quite of a debate. In every project we had debates with people to get also knowledge about the features of the area, the history, the way people use and their ambition, and try with spatial quality to make a combination between what is necessary for flood relief, but what is important for people to see a new future in these areas. And the people said, you know, we agree that you have to use this area, but we want to maintain agriculture. And you see these big green dots. These are areas designated for agriculture. Every area has a little ring dike, not meant for flood safety, but meant to make agriculture economically possible, so that it can flood once in 100 years, averagely, or once in 1,000 years. And where the arrows are on top, that's the area where we lowered the dike over a length of 2 kilometers with 3 meters. You don't really experience a dike anymore. And there is possible to let the water in. And the old dike, we had 4 gaps in with new bridges where the water can go under. So that's an example of in rural area. Okay, and this is an aerial view where you can see, if you look closely, the new bridges. And, well, you should imagine maybe that before this project has been realized, it was not so wet. It was all potato, beet, and corn area. So it really transferred from agriculture to a combination of agriculture, recreation, and nature. It attracts a lot of people because now you have a nice way to enter this nature conservation area of the Biesbos with bicycle lanes we made, with footpaths, which were not there before. And nature reacted immediately. When this project was realized, the osprey and the sea eagle decided to breed there, and that was on national news. We had, and that's also a nice example, we had in the beginning of this year high water. It was not dangerous, but it attracted a lot of media attention. And on the radio we have the traffic news, like where the traffic jams are. And to my surprise, on the radio it said that there was a traffic jam to this boulder because people want to experience flooding. So they didn't see it as a threat, they see it as something to experience. So I think that's a good thing. Well, some pictures of the Noordwaard, a lot of bridges built, also under architecture, a pumping station, where we also try to have a little bit history seeable still for in the future. You see the bricks on top are different than on the bottom, and on top they are reused bricks from the old farms that had to be removed. And it also, the line between also shows how high the water can get. And it didn't happen yet. Then, the future challenges. Well, I talked a bit about the Delta Works and the storm surge of 1953 and the 1,800 casualties, and that we are a very vulnerable country with the largest part located below sea level, and a country where, despite all of that, since 1953, not one person died by flooding. So I think our problem is not technique, it's not knowledge, it's not attention, but it's awareness. I think Dutch people generally are not so much aware about the location they live in, so that needs a lot of attention, it gets a lot of attention. But then again, we really feel that climate change is happening. And when we started Room for the River, our government said, not only said we need flood protection by making room for the river, but they always said we want to make a first step to climate adaptation. And they said a first step, that means that a second step has to be done. And we expect even more water running through the rivers. And this September, our Delta Commissioner, we have a Delta Commissioner, specially designated to this kind of problems, who directly advises the government. He said we were thinking about sea level rise in a century of 1 meter, but maybe we should expect 2 or 3 meters. And if that is the case, we have a lot of work to do if we want to stay living in the Netherlands. So sea level maybe is rising even more than we expected. River discharge, we expect more to come. In effect, with Room for the River, we can safely receive 16 million liter water over the River Rhine per second, but we feel we must be able to receive 18 million liter per second over the River Rhine. And then what we tend to see also in Holland is less rainfall, but if it rains, it's more heavy. And that's another problem. That's not a problem from the sea or from the rivers, but is a problem that really occurs in cities. How to deal with all that water that comes from rain and how to give it away, especially in cities. And then drought. We are a country, we are used in abundance of water. But this year is a very special year, I think. We normally have 1 month of summer, and now summer started in April. And when I took the airplane to Ljubljana, it was still summer in Holland. So we have still a shortage of 30 centimeters of groundwater, and that gives another challenge, maybe of finding ways to store more water for periods of drought, where we tend to lose and spill a lot of fresh water to keep the salt water out. So maybe there is something that has to be done in future as well. So the idea what we had after the Delta Works for Holland is finished, well, we don't have that idea anymore, but it shows that working on water, safety, quality never stops. So what happens in future? Well, Room for the River just nearly finished, and another program already started. We discovered by new technology and new information that the dikes are maybe not so strong as we expected. So we start to strengthen half of our length of dikes at a value of 7.5 billion euro until 2050. And then again, our government in September announced that the next step in Room for the River will be starting, calling integrated river management. So you can never stop with working with water. And then what I think is interesting from Room for the River is because of the paradigm shift, I think we have now much more tools to address flood risks. Before, for many centuries, the reaction has always been heightening and strengthening dikes, and now our toolbox has extended. And this is a picture I think is interesting of the water square in Rotterdam, where the urban development is designed also, if necessary, to receive water. In this place, they can store, if necessary, 1 million liters of water. And that leads that basements will not flood and damage will be controlled beforehand. So combination of function, I think that's the challenge what we are facing, to see how we can live with water in cities, where we tended to focus on rural areas. And that's why your presentation I liked very much, because I see in the pictures that in this city, I think you achieved a very good way of the relationship between the city and the river. And I think that's a challenge that is more widely to be picked up. Also new techniques in the dikes. What's happening is a very interesting time where all kinds of innovations and techniques are evolving. I was very happy to talk yesterday with some young people here that also have these new ideas with new technologies and new ways of using computers, because there are possibilities, I think. It is not necessary that strengthening dikes lead to higher and broadening dikes. There are also technical measures. Now, these are a few examples. This is also an interesting example. The Polder Noordwaard, which I showed just now, we had a debate with people living in this old fortress. This is designed that said, you know, I don't want a dike in front of my house. We were planning to protect them, but they didn't want to. And we had such a good debate that we were challenged to think of other solutions. And then we said, why is a dike as high as we make them? It's not only the level of water, but it's also the waves made by wind. So if you can get the waves out of the water, then the dike can be lower. Well, that's a technique, and that's a technique from nature, especially an ecological technique. In the tropics, the mangrove trees. And I always make a joke when I stand here. So we planted this row of willow trees that really get the energy out of the water, and the dike behind that and the fortress is lower and doesn't show as much as the dike. I'm visiting that place many times by very many delegations. And I remember I told the Asian Development Bank people, I said to them, you know, that is really the Dutch trade genes we have, that we copy the Asian mangroves and sell it back to the Asians again. Because I was in a presentation of Deltares, our leading institute, and they said, you know, this can be a solution for Indonesia. I think, yeah, it comes originally from Indonesia, probably. So that's the tradesmanship of the Dutch. Another nice example, I think, in combination of function is at the coast, because I talk about the rivers, especially because that is really what I'm into. But the coast zone is, of course, stay very important. And there were weak spots that are repaired. And here at the town of Katwijk, they made a new dune. But why not combine it with, in this case, a parking lot? So there's parking spaces in the dunes, and it looks very natural. And it gives the flood protection safety you need. Well, again, the water square in Rotterdam, as I feel the challenge now to combine urban life with water. And this is an interesting thing, the sand engine. We nourish the beaches because it tends to erode. And we bring every time the sand back. And then we said, why don't use the force of nature? We bring a large pack of sand in the shallow area of the sea and let nature bring it where it is needed. And you see that you get another landscape. It's very valuable for ecology and nature, and it attracts people that like to see this. So this is also another way of thinking about building with nature instead of against nature. And then again, we had a lot of ideas in the past that we maybe forgot about. We started with flood mounts. And now, and you see that in Room for the River projects, we had a polder where the farmers said, you know, I understand that you need our polder for flood protection and let the water in, but we don't want to leave. So we're going to stay. And how can we stay on top of a flood mount that always stay dry, which have a connection to a dike, where you always can go to the shop and to the doctor. And that is, again, a very good solution. An old solution, a centuries-old solutions which is fit for the future. Thank you very much.